All right, hello there, and welcome to week 7 of our class Guide to the Old Testament. This week we're going to be looking at the books of both Numbers and Deuteronomy as we're trying to finish up the Pentateuch and move on toward the historical books before Christmas break. So you have some discussion questions here that come from your homework, and let's start filling in our first easy peasy blanks here. So today we're studying the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy. And of course, we have two themes because we have two books. So our theme for Numbers that we've been reviewing and rehearsing, wandering in the wilderness. So Numbers primarily records the story of how Israel failed to enter the land the first time God called them to, and instead was punished to wander in the wilderness outside the promised land for 40 years. And then Deuteronomy, our theme was rehearsing God's requirements. So Deuteronomy consists mostly of speeches given by Moses right on the edge of the promised land, kind of Moses' last words before he dies and before Israel goes in to take the land from the Canaanites. So because we have a lot of territory to cover today, you'll notice I've titled this next part, the selected shape of these books. We're only really going to look at a few key passages from these books. But one of the questions we want to make sure we're considering here, after the beginning of Numbers and like Numbers 10 through 11, is this moment when Israel actually leaves Sinai. So we've been at Mount Sinai since Exodus chapter 19. We were there for the whole book of Leviticus. In terms of actual time, Israel's been there for a year. But in Numbers 10 through 11, they set out. They have the covenant that God has given them. He's commanded them what to do. And now they're ready to go up and take the promised land. So one of the questions that we want to ask at this point is what effect has the law, the covenant that God gave to Israel, what effect has that really had on their lives? Is Israel doing any better or any worse in terms of their obedience to God because he has given them the law? So we're going to look at two stories from the book of Numbers that help us think through that question. First, we're going to look at Numbers 13 through 14. It's the story of the sending out of the spies, the 12 spies. Let's zoom in a little bit here to this box. The sending out of the spies into the land. We'll give this guy a mustache so you know he's a spy. Okay. And a little jaunty spy hat here. And he's got like a telescope going so he can spy out the promised land and give back a report to Israel on what it's like. And there's 12 of these spies, one from each of the tribes. And let's go ahead and take a look at this passage here. Let me pull it up. So here we are in Numbers 13, and I'm reading here from the New International Version, the NIV. So the Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore or to spy out the land of Canaan, one from each tribe." So it gives you the list of their names. Of course, the two most famous ones are Caleb right here, and then where is Joshua? He's called Hoshea right here, except it tells you right here that Moses gave Hoshea the name Joshua. So Caleb and Joshua are among these spies. And they're supposed to go see what kind of land do these Canaanites live in? Is it good or bad land? What kind of towns do they have? Do they have walls in these towns? How's the soil? And so the spies go out and they, in particular, come back with this huge cluster of grapes, so big that they're carrying on a pole between them. And they bring back this mixed report. So in verse 27, they gave Moses this account. "We went into the land which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit." And you can picture them showing off this giant cluster of grapes at this moment. But there's also a negative aspect of the report. "The people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there." And in verse 32, they talk about how the people we saw there are of great size, right? There's very large, tall people with fortified cities in this land. And so it's a mixed report. On the one hand, we have this big clump of grapes. That's good news, right? The fruit of the land is good. So we'll give that a check mark. Good report. But then also, the people of the land, they're really tall and strong. This is a really tall stick figure right here. He's got a big old sword, and he's angry, right? So that is a negative report. And so the response from the people back here in Numbers 13, really in verse 14, despite Caleb's effort to convince them they should go take the land anyway, that night all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. They say, if only we had died in Egypt. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? So they're not trusting in God at all that he's actually going to fight for them and win the battle for them. And there's an ominous note here. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. So Moses is now going to go talk to the Lord about this situation. And God gives us a real diagnosis. What's going on in this moment as the Israelites refuse to go into the promised land that they've been journeying toward this whole time? So the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs that I have performed among them? So I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, and I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than they. Now Moses convinces God and intercedes for his people so that God does not strike them all down, but they are condemned to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. That's what he says. Let's see. I thought it was right there. No, I missed it. Anyway, he tells them as many days as they spent spying out the land of Canaan, 40 days, that's how many years they're going to wander in the wilderness. But the key phrase that I want you to pull out of that passage is what God said in terms of his diagnosis of the people. What's the problem that they have? He says, how long will they not believe in me? So, really God's assessment of how the people are doing cuts right to the heart of what's going on. Even though they've been given good laws, good statutes, even though they've been shown God's power through his signs in Egypt and the Red Sea, their hearts still don't believe in him. They don't trust him. Now we're going to look here at another very similar story. Let's go ahead now to Numbers 20, if you're following along in your Bible. And we get a similar story here that's focused not on the people of Israel, but on Moses and Aaron. So this is the story of bringing water out of the rock. This is a rock. There's a little tunnel, and let's put some water coming out of the tunnel. This is the second story we've had where Moses brings water out of a rock. Okay, so here's Moses. You can tell it's Moses because Moses has a beard, and he's got his staff, and he's going to strike the rock 2 times. Makes water come out. And let's just go ahead and look at this account here in Numbers 20. Let me pull it up. Numbers 20. Sweet. So in the first month, they arrive at the desert of Zin. That's where Miriam died. And there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. And again, they say, if only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. They're always complaining about this. They wish they were already dead. They want some water to drink. And so again, Moses and Aaron go to the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appears. And this is the instructions that the Lord gives to Moses. Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff, and water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. Now, if the story ended there, you'd likely think that nothing really was wrong with what just happened. Moses seems to have obeyed God's instructions, and water did come out of the rock, and everyone got to drink. But then you get this rebuke here in verse 12. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. And so that really raises the question of what went wrong in this story to lead God to punish Moses and Aaron. And you'll see a few different theories come out about this, explanations of this story. The first is that maybe something that Moses and Aaron did in this story was wrong and so brought punishment. So, for example, God told them to speak to the rock, but it says that Moses struck the rock. Maybe he wasn't supposed to strike it, he was supposed to speak to it. And you might add here, maybe it was because he struck it 2 times. Maybe that showed that Moses was angry or that he thought he needed to do the work himself to bring the water out of the rock. So really the problem was in this striking that Moses did. Now, what I want you to see that I think is a problem with that interpretation is that up here in verse 8, when God gave his instructions, the first thing he says is to take the staff. And it says that's what Moses did. Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as he commanded him. And now back in Exodus 17, the last time we had a story of bringing water out of the rock, that's exactly what God told him to do, and to strike the rock with the staff. And so it's hard to really blame Moses for thinking that was what he was supposed to do with the staff when God says this. The other problem with that interpretation is, notice in the rebuke down here in verse 12, Moses and Aaron are in trouble here because you did not trust in me enough. And so what did Aaron do wrong if the problem was striking the rock? Seems like that would be on Moses. So that's a difficult way to understand it. Another possibility is maybe it was something that Moses said that was the problem. So maybe it's that he called the people rebels, right? These are God's people. Maybe he shouldn't be speaking to them in that kind of an angry, derogatory way. Another possibility, maybe it's because you'll notice he said, must we bring water out of this rock, right? Like he's taking the credit for himself for this miracle. But again, the problem with that is back here in verse 8, when God gives the instructions, that's exactly what God says. You will bring water out of the rock for the community. So Moses is really just parroting God's word in that sentence. Hard to fault him for that. And really, it's not clear from the story that we're being told what exactly Moses and Aaron did wrong. There's no clear and easy fault in their actions to point out. And this is an analogy that I've stolen from somewhere that I like to use. This is a painting by Rembrandt, The Return of the Prodigal Son. And Rembrandt is well known for his use of shadows and light. And so, of course, in this painting, you can see in the top left corner, there's all kinds of shadow, whereas the prodigal son himself is really highlighted. And one way to try to read this story would be to do a bunch of research and careful study of the painting and see if you could, fill in what's in the shadow, right? So, maybe this guy that you can just barely see, maybe he's wearing a red shirt. And I bet there's actually a spiral staircase back here that goes up this way. But here's the thing. In a Rembrandt painting, the shadows are just as much there on purpose as the bright spaces are. Right? The whole canvas was white before he started. And so it doesn't seem like it makes sense to approach the painting from that direction. And I think that same kind of a thing would apply to the story we're reading here in Numbers 20. Just to say that the action that Moses and Aaron did that was wrong seems to be something that's in the shadows, whereas what's in the light is the evaluation that God gives. So look at verse 12. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me or believe in me. It's that same word we saw in Numbers 14. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. And so the problem here with Moses and Aaron, God says, is that they did not believe in him. You did not believe in me. And because of that, the story of the Pentateuch is going to end with Moses dying right on the edge of the promised land. And so the ideal life in the Pentateuch really doesn't belong to Moses, who lived under the law and who died on the edge of the promised land. It belongs to Abraham, who believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. Now, in class, we're going to do some more exploration of 2 more passages, particularly Numbers 24 and Deuteronomy 32. And we're going to use this worksheet to do it right here, which is also in our documents online, in our resources. I'm going to leave this one up to you to do on your own or to do in class, but the basic idea that we're trying to do is show the way that in Numbers 24, we're getting all kinds of links between the different poems that we find in the Pentateuch. So Numbers 24 and Genesis 49 and Genesis 3:15 and all these different poetic sections from the Pentateuch are linking to each other by the use of shared language. And one of the common themes that they're drawing out is this idea of the coming king that we already talked about in Genesis 49 and that Numbers 24 is addressing as well, and how that's part of the future hope of the Pentateuch. And similarly, Deuteronomy 32 helps us to cast our hope forward to a time when God's people will disobey and go into exile, but he's going to bring them back and restore them and make them his people again in a new and a better way. And so the hope that the Pentateuch points us forward to really isn't in the law given at Sinai. The people consistently disobey that law because they don't believe in God. Rather, the hope that we should have is looking forward to a coming king, the Messiah, God's anointed leader, and also this return from exile, the gift of a new heart that's obedient to God. And that really brings into focus here our reward that we get from reading Numbers and Deuteronomy carefully, which I would say is our need for God's intervention. In other words, these books really highlight the way that our problem as human beings is much deeper than just needing to be educated or needing to be told what to do. It's not just our ignorance, it's our rebellion and it's our pride and it's our refusal to trust in God and admit that what he says is good and what he says is good, and then what he says is bad is bad. And that's really the message of the New Testament and the Old Testament, that what we need is what Deuteronomy calls a circumcised heart so that we will love the Lord our God. And that's what we have in Jesus through his death and resurrection. So we see very clearly in these failures by Moses and by the tribes of Israel who saw God's signs and his amazing miracles, their failure to believe in him shows that we as humans have a deep need for God's intervention and his grace in our lives. And that's just a quick look at some of the key ideas in the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Hope you're able to join us soon, and thanks for watching.